We tend to seek excessive information when it does not influence decisions. A common misconception is that more information is always better. We believe information is power and information is always valuable. As a result, we overvalue information, especially when we make high-stakes decisions. Our desire to seek information is associated with our brain's dopaminergic reward system. Seeking information, regardless of its impact on our decisions, triggers the dopaminergic system, producing feelings of pleasure. Our information-seeking behavior is often influenced not just by its tangible benefits, but also by the anticipated satisfaction we derive from acquiring it. This tendency towards excessive information collection is closely related to another psychological tendency, the illusion of control. The illusion of control means our inclination to overestimate our capacity to influence outcomes that are predominantly or even entirely dictated by chance. We may falsely assume that having more information will enable us to take actions to change those outcomes, even when they are beyond our control. As a result, we may invest excessive amount of resources, be it time, money, or effort, in the pursuit of information that is ultimately irrelevant or unhelpful. How long does it take for us to form an impression about a stranger's likability, trustworthiness, competence, or aggressiveness when you first meet them? Surprisingly, it takes as little as 100 milliseconds. To put it in perspective, a second has 1,000 milliseconds. So we're making those judgments within a tenth of a second, based purely on a person's facial features. This short period of time is barely enough for us to register that we've seen a face. Interestingly, giving us more time does not necessarily help us make more accurate judgments. Instead, it only boosts our confidence in our decisions. We often underestimate how little information we actually use when making decisions. Besides facial features, clothing also plays an important role in how we perceive others. Expensive clothes are often associated with a higher competence. This perception, once again, is formed in milliseconds. In a series of 9 experiments, participants were shown pictures of the same face, each time dressed in different clothing, including a suit and tie, a t-shirt, and a sweater. Those images were shown for different lengths of time, from about 1 second to roughly 130 milliseconds, just enough time for us to register a face in our brain. Across the experiments, participants consistently associated expensive clothes with competence, even when incentivized not to do so or when provided with profession and income details. Given that people form lightning-fast judgments about competence, one way to make better decisions is to avoid exposure to the misleading information. A research study on teacher evaluation showed that a principal's evaluation of a high school teacher's performance was significantly influenced by nonverbal cues such as being supportive, likable, attentive, enthusiastic, warm, and optimistic. Those judgments were based on short, silent video clips lasting less than 30 seconds. If you are a school principal, you may believe you'd make more data-driven decisions compared to the participants in this experiment. However, you may need to reconsider it because we are often not as exceptional as we think we are, which is the illusion of superiority. A mental shortcut I'll introduce in my future videos. We often make decisions incredibly fast, and we tend not to fully acknowledge the speed of our decision-making process. We falsely assume that we'll use more information and data informing our judgments than we actually do. Despite spending resources to collect more and more data, we often neglect to incorporate the data into our judgment. The notion of data-driven decision-making is often used as a cover for indecisiveness or to justify waiting for more data. We may delay decision-making until the data align with our preferences and conveniently disregard any data that could potentially challenge our intended course of action. In this case, data are used as deceptive tactic to divert attention from our indecisiveness or real intentions. Often we don't know the exact probability of a gain or loss, or how helpful certain information is to decision-making. Driven by psychological motives like curiosity and anticipation, we frequently seek information that's irrelevant to our decisions. Recently, studies have suggested that seeking new information can become addictive. Sometimes we're compelled to seek more data, even if we're not expecting to gain any new insight from the new data. This behavior can be explained by the fact that seeking new information triggers the brain's dopamine-producing reward system, much like financial rewards, food, and drugs do. Eating food, whether it's nutritious or junk, activates specific brain regions known for their role in valuation. Those brain regions include the striatum, the ventral medial prefrontal cortex or medial prefrontal cortex. Those regions are part of the dopaminergic reward system, which produces dopamine, leading to feelings of pleasure. However, the dopaminergic reward system does not differentiate between whether the trigger is good or bad. As with nutritious food versus junk food, or painkillers versus addictive drugs. Similarly, information activates our brain's dopaminergic reward system irrespective of its usefulness. Just like our brains overvalue the nutrition from junk food, they also overvalue information that makes us feel good regardless of its actual value. Much like our tendency to become addicted to drugs and comfort food that causes a dopamine surge, we are also prone to becoming addicted to data and information, which stimulate our dopaminergic system in a similar manner. For example, people who knew the names of basketball teams and their performance records were less accurate in predicting the outcome of NBA games than those who only knew the team's performance records. But most people still believe that knowing the team names improved their predictions. The team names themselves are generally irrelevant when it comes to predicting a team's performance in sports like basketball. A team's performance in a game or a sports competition is determined by many factors such as the skill level of individual players, team strategies, coaching tactics, player injuries, and other situational variables. The name of the team by itself does not have a direct impact on how well they perform in a specific game. Our brains are naturally inclined to consume and process all available information because they are designed to gather as much data as possible to make sense of the world around us. Throughout human history, the ability to gather information efficiently and use it to make decisions was important for survival. As a result, our brains have developed to be information-seeking machines. However, irrelevant information competes for our limited cognitive resources with the information that's important for decision-making. We often assume that new information gradually accumulates atop the old information until a mental tipping point is reached, leading to a decision. However, the process of information aggregation is more similar to a power law function. We tend to give substantial weight to the initial information we receive, and this can shape our perceptions and decisions substantially. The initial information is called anchor. Do you still remember the anchoring bias I introduced in my earlier video? The first few pieces of information tend to bear much more weight than subsequent pieces. We usually use the initial piece of information to arrive at our decision, yet often fail to incorporate new information to modify that decision. Imagine if I have information regarding your genetic predisposition to certain types of cancer. Would you want to know? Yes or no? In a study, researchers posed the same question online to 400 participants. More than half responded affirmatively, while the rest, 42%, answered negatively. Why is it that some people sought this information while others preferred to avoid it? The reason is that a single piece of information can influence a decision maker's emotions and cognition in both positive and negative ways. The dopaminergic system tends to process information about favorable futures more frequently than undesirable ones. As a result, people tend to seek excessive information when it produces desirable outcomes, leading to information bias. On the other hand, people tend to avoid unfavorable information when it results in undesirable outcomes, leading to what's known as the ostrich effect, another shortcut I'll introduce in my future videos. Under the influence of the information bias, some leaders are fixated on data-driven decision-making. However, data can be alluring yet misleading. By overly focusing on data, some leaders risk overlooking the most important component, people. Take, for example, the practice of using standardized testing scores to evaluate teachers. Many aspects of a teacher's abilities cannot be captured by those scores alone. High-stakes testing often compels teachers to improve student test scores by any means necessary, including cheating. Research conducted using data from Chicago public schools estimated that severe instances of cheating on standardized tests by teachers or administrators occur in at least 4 to 5% of elementary school classrooms each year. Now, don't get me wrong, we still need data as signposts to guide our decisions. However, if we aim to collect and analyze data for every single decision we make, we'll be paralyzed by the data. We need the correct data to make informed decisions. Otherwise, we could easily become lost in the overwhelming flood of information. When it comes to data, we need to be thoughtful about when to actively seek out data and make data-driven decisions, and also recognize when to exercise restraint and accept that the available data are sufficient. The concept of data-driven or data-informed decision-making presumes that decision makers can distinguish irrelevant data, identify noise within the data, and make the best decision accordingly. Such an assumption, unfortunately, does not always hold true, even for experts. The catastrophic explosion of the Space Shuttle Challengers on January 28, 1986, is a glaring example. On a chilly day with a temperature of only 35 degrees in Florida, the shuttle exploded, killing all 7 astronauts on board. The low temperature may have contributed to the failure of the O-rings seals, causing the pressurized burning gas to leak out of the booster. The day before the disaster, NASA executives and scientists debated whether the combination of low temperatures and O-ring failure would be problematic. But since no clear correlation was observed between low temperatures and O-ring failures in the 7 previous launches where O-ring damage had occurred, they decided to proceed with the Challenger's launch. Tragically, the decision makers failed to consider the temperature for the 17 shuttle launches where there was no O-ring failure. The complete data from the all 24 launches would have unequivocally suggested the need to delay the Challenger launch. Later analysis suggests that given the low temperature, the probability of disaster was over 99%. Even experts in this case failed to seek the correct data for their decision-making process. It's important to understand that while data are a powerful tool in decision-making, it must be used wisely. We must resist the lure of data for the data's sake and focus instead on its relevance to our decisions. Only then can we truly leverage the power of data to guide us towards wise and effective decisions. Start observing your decision-making processes and those of others around you. See if you can spot instances of information bias. Please feel free to share your comments below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.